Hey, everybody. All right. Live number 2 for the day. All right. Welcome, everybody. If you're new here, my name is Coach Hall. I am an AP Lang teacher in Arkansas. And the AP Lang exam is a little more than a week away. So I've been going live a few times a day for the past couple days just to answer student questions. I've been going live on both YouTube and TikTok. So if you're just joining, feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the AP Lang exam. And I'll be trying to go live as the exam approaches as well. So make sure you're following if you're an AP Lang student and you want help studying for the exam. Welcome, everybody who's just joining. Feel free to ask any AP Lang questions you have in the chat. While we're waiting on some questions to come in, let's just kind of talk about some of the things that you can do to prepare for the upcoming AP Lang exam. So, first things first, we want to remember some of the things that you might need for testing. So, if you're taking the paper test, you're going to want regular number 2 pencils, not mechanical. You're going to want blue and black ink pens. It doesn't really matter which one, whichever you prefer, just something that won't bleed through the paper or smudge. You're also going to want maybe a snack for the 10-minute break that you get in between the sections. And I've been telling my students to try to get an inexpensive watch, something that like can't send or receive messages. So like no Fitbits or smartwatches. But sometimes in the testing room, you can't actually see the clock very clearly. And so it can be really helpful to have your own watch. Or sometimes the clocks can be hard to read too. Thank you for liking the live over on TikTok. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. For those watching on YouTube, feel free to put questions in the chat as well. I'll be trying to go live kind of a little quicker tonight, maybe like just 30 minutes. I was on for over an hour earlier today, but I wanted to hop on and answer student questions in case people had them. So yeah, let me know what you're worried about for the upcoming AP Lang exam or what you're trying to do to prepare. Is there a specific order the essays are in? Okay, great question. So they're regardless of whether you do the paper test or digital test, it should be in the same order. Now you can do them in any order you want. So the order you're going to see them in is synthesis, which is the one with sources. That one I think takes the longest because of all the sources. The next one's rhetorical analysis. That one's my personal favorite. That one is like usually it's like 2 columns of text and it's like an article, a speech, a letter. They've been doing a lot of speeches lately. So that's rhetorical analysis. That's question 2. And then question 3 is argument. So that one is usually a quote or something and a prompt that goes with it. It's a lot shorter. And then if you're taking the paper test, they kind of updated their paper a couple years ago. So it used to be that there was like this little box in the corner and you'd write like Q1 in it. Now it's kind of like a little bubble thing. And when readers get your papers, so let's say you bubble in Q2, if you bubble in the little bubble for question 2 for each page that you write on, it shows us like just those pages. We can scroll through your whole booklet and see your other test questions and stuff, but it'll just, if we're grading question 2, it'll just show us those at first, which can be really helpful. So yeah, you can write the essays in any order that you want to. However, they do appear in the order of synthesis, argument, rhetorical analysis. Great question. Let's see what else we've got. I struggle with synthesis essays. Any tips? Yes, I think the biggest thing, it kind of depends on what you're struggling with, but with synthesis, I feel like the commentary is kind of the hard part. It's probably the hard part for all the essays. So really think about why you're selecting the evidence that you selected. Think about what it shows us as far as like short-term or long-term impact or how it might be beneficial to society. And usually it helps if you have 2 sources within a paragraph. That's not a rule, but it does read better if you have what we call a conversation of sources. All right, we've got a question over here on YouTube. For rhetorical analysis, do you recommend we split the body paragraphs into methods of development, movements, and or main rhetorical choices? Okay, so great question. The way I try to teach it, and this is not the way I've always taught it, but it's the way that I think is best. Teachers kind of change as they get more experience. I prefer to teach my students to do a chronological analysis. It used to be with the exam, there used to be a lot more device-driven essays. But now with this addition of the word or phrase line of reasoning, a chronological analysis is typically better. And so I think what your question is asking kind of helps us distinguish between the two. So chronological analysis is when you analyze the text in order, like beginning, middle, and end. Like you look for movements or like sections within the piece. If it's a shorter piece, it might be like first half, second half. So the reason why this can possibly lead to a better essay is because of the line of reasoning. So the person who wrote the passage is going to have a line of reasoning. They will have made certain choices in a particular order. And so as you analyze what they do in the beginning and then how they continue and how they conclude, then you're following their line of reasoning, which is basically their structure. And then you're analyzing like how the choices build off of each other. The other approach is a device driven approach. And that's kind of like the old way that it used to be taught. And it's not wrong. You can still score well with that. It's just that it doesn't necessarily lead to a better analysis. So that's when you have one paragraph about like repetition, let's say, and you put in evidence from all over the passage about repetition, not just in the beginning. So you can write about repetition and you can say the writer begins by repeating this and then focus on just the repetition in the beginning, and that's fine. And then continues with this and do a different choice. And that's more of the chronological way. Or some people like to just do like, here's a paragraph about repetition. I think while those like that's not what a lot of readers prefer, it still could, as long as you have evidence and commentary, it can still score well. Because again, it's a rough draft on the exam. So we read them supportively. Let's see. Do I have to have a really good vocabulary in my essays to get a 4 or 5? No. Try to avoid some of those lower level words like good, bad, thing, a lot, huge. But no, you don't need fancy words to get a 4 or a 5. Because the vocabulary itself could impact the sophistication point. But to be honest, that's so rare anyway. Only like between 5 and 9% of students earn that point, depending on the essay that we're talking about. That, like, no, your vocabulary doesn't automatically mean you'll get a lower score. Now, using stronger words and more precise words could help make your essay stronger. It could improve your commentary. It could make it more pleasant to read. But if you're worried about your vocabulary, that's okay. It's not going to impact your stuff too much. I'm so scared about the exam, not gonna lie. Well, what can we do to reduce some of that stress? Do you think an open or closed thesis is better for a rhetorical analysis essay? Most students do a closed thesis, and that's what I tend to teach because it is a 40-minute timed rough draft. So for those that are unfamiliar, a closed thesis is probably more of like what you first learned when you had to write essays, which is like you basically put your main ideas in your thesis. An open thesis is more open-ended, and those are, number one, they're harder to write, and number two, not like, so not all students are ready to learn that. But number two, in rhetorical analysis, they sometimes read like a summary, whereas it's easier for students and sometimes even for readers to identify the thesis if it's a closed thesis. Now, if you were writing like a 20-page paper in college, a closed thesis would be way too hard because it's such a long paper. It would be an open thesis. However, this is not a 20-page paper for college, so a closed thesis is totally fine for rhetorical analysis. That's what most people do. Let's see. Aw, thank you so much. I'm so glad it's helping your AP Lang class. I try to make videos that are helpful. Are there any specific grammar terms we should be aware of? Not really. There is one. I'm trying to think of what the phrase was that I saw in one of the questions. It might have been on the ACT. We just finished like a huge ACT unit because our kids just took that for our state test. Um, it might have been the ACT where they called it like a sentence pattern, and they just meant syntax. I don't think there's really anything for like grammar that you need to know as far as grammar terms for the AP Lang. Now, there are some terms that might come up in the multiple choice, but not really grammar terms. One term is like exigence. So if you've heard of Space Cat, you've probably heard of exigence. But if you haven't heard of that word, it's like basically what makes the person write or speak. It's like the catalyst. And so sometimes they'll ask a multiple choice question in the reading section where it's like, what is the exigence of the passage? That would be a very difficult question to answer if you don't know what exigence means. So it's not a grammar term, but that is one to know. Thank you for doing this. You're so welcome. Which essay to write first, how to budget time and all that. Okay, so I tend to tell students to put their essays, well, okay, most students write the synthesis essay first, even if it's not your strongest. It's just the most time consuming. So a lot of people like to get it out of the way. So I tend to recommend doing that one first. But then for the other two, I would say go with your stronger one. So if you are constantly getting better scores in rhetorical analysis than argument, do that second. If you get better scores in argument, then do that one second. If you get equal scores in both, look at the prompt and decide which one you want to do first. But I would prioritize what you think you can do well at. And I don't mean this in like a mean way, but it's going to be kind of blunt. We don't want to spend time on like an essay that we're like, we don't want to, how can I say this? If let's say for me, my weakest essay would be argument. So if I was taking this exam as a high school student, I know I could get like a 120, a 130 pretty easily in like 30 minutes for an argument. But I also know that if I had 40 or 50 minutes, that argument essay still might be just a 130. So, but I also know that like I really love rhetorical analysis. And if I had like 45 minutes, and I'm writing a fantastic essay, maybe I could get a full 6 out of 6. So for me, I would put argument last because like that's not my strength. And so I'm okay with having to rush that one, if that makes sense. So basically like play to your strengths in terms of the order. Now, as far as like pacing, there's some things you can do to kind of like help your pacing. Number one, write a short intro. Just a thesis is fine if you have to. We typically prefer to see a couple sentences of context plus the thesis, but the only point you get in your intro is the thesis point. You do not need a conclusion. So if you're struggling with your pacing, do not bother with a conclusion, especially if you're running out of time. You also don't need a counter argument. It's nice to sometimes have one, but it's not required. So those are things that you could omit in order to save time. Same with body paragraphs. You can just do two. Make sure they're very well developed, but two is totally fine. And that can help your pacing as well. But please attempt all essays. It is so disheartening when kids like leave it totally blank. At least try. Like worst case scenario, let's say you've only got 20 minutes, write a thesis statement and at least one body paragraph. Have a claim, have some evidence, have some commentary, put the word because in there and the word shows in there, and you could probably at least get a 120. So that kind of sounds bad. It's oversimplifying it, but you get the idea. If you want more help with like how to come up with an individualized game plan, definitely think about like what your strengths are. That can really help. And then something else to consider would be like for multiple choice too, you want to try to maximize your score that way. So if you know that you are better at like, let's say the reading multiple choice, uh, which is kind of rare. Most of my students are actually better at the writing, but start with the reading if that's your strength. A lot of my students this year who are better at the writing multiple choice, they're going to start there, which is passages 3, 4, and 5, because what happens sometimes is when they start with question 1, the reading, they take too long, and then they get to the part that they feel better with, like the part that they think they're good at. And then they're like, oh, I've only got 20 minutes left. And then they have to like guess on some of them or they have to rush. So we want to try to earn the points where we can. Play to your strengths. You can do the test out of order within the section. So like you don't have to take the multiple choice in order. You can start on whatever question you want. But if you're taking the paper test, please make sure you're actually lining it up on your bubble sheet, because that would be terrible if you got off by a row. But you can play to your strengths and maximize your score. Just going to slide this over for 1 second for those on TikTok, because there's a link I want to put in the chat on YouTube because someone was asking about like game plans and stuff. And I have a link. If you're interested, I do offer tutoring. It's very cost effective on OutSchool. And so I'll put a link over on YouTube if people are interested in that. If you're new to OutSchool, you get a credit towards your first class. And I make the class the price of the credit. So it's essentially no cost to you. But yeah, so if you're interested in tutoring, I'll put a link on YouTube for that. It's in my profile on TikTok if you're interested as well. How can we get the sophistication point? Okay, great question. I would say, so it really depends on which essay we're talking about. Rhetorical analysis, the way we see it happen the most is when people really analyze the choices in relation to the rhetorical situation and kind of situate it in a broader context. The other way that's kind of common is analyzing the complexities and tension within the passage. So that would be like, is there tension or complexity with like the speaker and the audience? Or is there like some kind of tension historically? The way that's least common is the vivid and descriptive style. It's not that you can't earn it, it's just that out of all the sophistication points that we typically see as teachers and readers, the one that we see the least is the vivid and descriptive style. Are you given rubric for essays on exam day? Great question. Technically, no, not the rubric, but on your exam, there's going to be these like bullet point reminders. It's kind of new. They've only been doing it for a couple years, and it's going to say basically like what the rubric requires. So there's going to be a reminder to have a thesis. There's going to be a reminder to have evidence. It's going to say explain the significance of your evidence, which is commentary. And then it talks about the last bullet point is like basically like have good spelling and grammar. That doesn't really matter. You can have spelling mistakes and it doesn't impact your score. So there's kind of a rubric, but it's like parts, it's like a bullet point of the rubric, but it's not the same rubric. So I would definitely, if you're worried about not knowing your rubric, I would look at that in advance to kind of see what readers are scoring for. So they sort of give it to you, but they sort of don't. How do I get past surface level analysis for rhetorical? Great question. So really with rhetorical, the way to improve, there's kind of two big tips that can help you. One is look at the word choice or details within the quotes that you're choosing. Because that can help elevate your score from like a 120 to a 130. So like once you've selected the quote that you want to analyze, look at the word choice within the quote and talk about why they're using certain words there. So you would have like, you would say the quote, and like, embed it into a sentence. And then in your commentary, pull out words from the quote. Like, are they using the word we? Why are they using the word we? Are they trying to unite the audience or be like one with the audience? Are they using like Americans? Like what words are they using? Sometimes it's words with positive connotation. Sometimes it's negative. So in your commentary, you can look at the word choice within the quote, like look at one or two words from the quote. That can help improve your score because there's something in the rubric about like essentially like word choice and detail. Something else that'll improve your score is really considering the rhetorical situation. So asking yourself, why this choice for this audience on this occasion? So really thinking about, okay, this is let's say it's a funeral speech, a eulogy. Okay, well, what's their purpose here? Well, typically the purpose of a eulogy is to honor the deceased. Okay, well, what choice are they making to do that? Why is this the best choice to achieve that purpose? That kind of thing. Because if the occasion changes, let's say it's a commencement speech, a graduation speech, they're going to make totally different choices because it's a totally different occasion. So that can help. If you're looking for rhetorical analysis tips, I have several videos on my channel, but there's one that's called My Best Tip for Rhetorical Analysis. That video goes into that a little bit more detail. In more detail, I also have a pretty recent video about rhetorical analysis sentence frames. And I think those sentence frames could help you if you're struggling with your commentary. Thank you for sharing the live. I really appreciate that. Can you explain line of reasoning? So line of reasoning, it's funny. I don't remember ever being like told about line of reasoning as a high school student, but when they redid the rubric, they kind of put that in there. I feel like line of reasoning has always existed, but we haven't always called it that. Line of reasoning is a logical progression of ideas. So there's two things that you need to consider with this. For rhetorical analysis specifically, the passage that you read, and also for multiple choice for the for multiple choice in general, the passage should have a line of reasoning. So there should be certain choices made in a certain order to make it more persuasive. So that's where the logical progression comes in. So when you're answering multiple choice questions or analyzing a passage, you're essentially following the line of reasoning. Now, when you are writing an essay, you have to create a line of reasoning. So you want to make sure that you have a thesis, which is an overarching claim. You need body paragraphs that have kind of like a sub-claim, like they have a main idea that you're trying to prove. And then you need evidence that proves that claim and commentary that explains the evidence. And so basically the idea is that if you have a weaker line of reasoning, you're not fully developing your commentary. Usually in most cases, it's either really repetitive or really simplistic. So some things that you can do to help your line of reasoning, remember that your reader cannot infer. So make sure that you are providing enough context. Don't assume that they know. Use transition words that can really help. So words like therefore or thus, furthermore, and moreover can really help. consequently is a word that you can use in pretty much any of the essays. Those help you create this like cause and effect language, which can help your line of reasoning as well. Okay, let's answer a question from TikTok. Let's see. The MCQ is so dependent on the excerpt. I agree. I love the second half too. I like the writing questions better. Can you say hi, Ms. Okay, I don't want to mispronounce the name. Is it? Oh, I really don't want to mispronounce the name. Ms. B. She's a huge fan. Absolutely. Please tell her. Is it okay? Can someone like tell me in the chat? Because I don't know. I don't want to mispronounce the person's last name. Is it like Bouge? How do you pronounce that? Because I would be happy to shout out any teachers that y'all have, but I don't want to mispronounce their names. Luckily, with the last name Hall, it's kind of easy to pronounce, I suppose. I struggle to finish MCQ. Any tips? We were kind of talking about this before with pacing. Sometimes people do better by starting with the writing questions first and then going to finish the reading ones later. You said it perfectly. Okay, good. Thank you. I just didn't want to mispronounce it. So yeah, if you want to make sure that you're not spending too long on any one particular passage or question, because it can be really difficult to want to move on. Like I know sometimes people are like a perfectionist. That's how I took tests. I was like, I don't want to move on until I'm sure I'm right. But the thing is you have to realize that each question is worth 1 point for multiple choice. So it doesn't matter if it's the easiest question on the test or the hardest question on the test, it's still worth 1 point. So we don't want to linger on any one particular passage or question too long. Something else that can help is realizing that sometimes, and this is not like a cold hard fact, but sometimes there are hard passages with easy questions, and sometimes there are easy passages with hard questions. So don't panic if the passage is hard. It's okay to like move on. If you're like, I'm not ready for this, I'll come back to it. But don't assume that just because you have a couple hard questions or a hard passage that like you're gonna fail. Because that's not the case. To be honest, if they gave us all the time we need on the MCQ, everyone can rock it. Yeah, I agree with that too. I think that's the same for like the SAT and the ACT too, is if you just had more time, your score could be better. Do you have outlines for each essay that you can share with us? Not necessarily outlines. I do have like tip sheets and stuff. And I have like sentence frames and things, but I don't really have an outline. I have like the sentence frames are on my YouTube channel. I think those would be most helpful to students. And I'm trying to think, like for body paragraphs, I kind of have like a formula of just like you need a claim, evidence, commentary, concluding sentence. But within that, I have sentence frame videos and other resources that can help. So if you go to my channel, I forgot. It was a couple weeks ago. They're pretty recent. I've been doing a ton of YouTube shorts lately because I've been trying to like take the TikTok stuff and move it to YouTube and see if it converts. But if you go to some of my recent videos, I have one about rhetorical analysis sentence frames and one about argument and synthesis sentence frames. And I think that would really help. So it's not really like an outline, but it can help you if you struggle with writing. Let's see. Got a couple questions here on YouTube. Is thesis not the same as line of reasoning? Thesis is a part of the line of reasoning, but it's not all of it, if that makes sense. Like it's a component of it. Any quick tips for creating an outline? So I would recommend, what I tell my students to do is like plan your thesis. You don't even have to write it out, but at least kind of jot down what your position is. Use like shorthand if you have to, or bullet points. And I tell my students to plan their main ideas and their evidence. If you have any ideas about commentary that you want to be sure to include, also put those in. Because when I used to have to take standardized tests, I took a couple in college, and there was this one time where I was like, oh yeah, I really want to write about that. And then I was like, I'll remember. And then I got to that part in the essay and I was like, what was that one idea? So the next time I took a test, I made sure to write it down and like circled it on my paper. And then I was like, what was that one idea? And I knew that I had a note about it. So bullet point outlines can really help, but it doesn't have to be super detailed. But if you make an outline first, it helps you stay on track. So you're less likely to have writer's block like halfway through. But just bullet point your main ideas, like thesis, main ideas, evidence, anything you need to remember to fall back on. How much time should I spend per passage for saving time? So if it's That's a good question. For multiple choice, usually the reading takes students a little bit longer. So it's approximately half the test is reading, multiple choice, and half is writing. But like I would say no more than 35 minutes on the reading MCQ. So that way you have at least 25 for the writing MCQ. I don't know that it has to be 30-30 because I think the reading is a little bit harder. It's more time consuming and more dense, but definitely not more than 35 minutes if you intend to use the full hour, in my opinion, anyway. Is there any watch you recommend to budget my time on essays? Do you okay, do you mean like a literal watch? Like a or do you mean like a methodology? Because I do think it's helpful if students bring a you can't bring a smartwatch, but if you bring a watch to testing, it can help you keep track of time. Can you get away with writing 2 body paragraphs? Yes, you can. Most of my students do, and they do just fine. Please say hi, Sammy, Chloe, and Jake. Awesome. Well, I just did, but hi, Sammy, Chloe, and Jake. Thank you for watching. Do you recommend the Barron's book? No, I don't. Here's why. I've had tutoring students that have used it and their scores were like very off of what they did on like AP Classroom. And like sometimes they were way worse and sometimes they were way better. So if you're looking for like testing materials, the one that I recommend the most is the Ultimate Review Packet from Tim Freitas. He put a lot of time and effort into that. He's an AP reader. Good friend of mine. We are actually doing a live together the night before the exam. I'm gonna see. I don't know if it's gonna work, but it's gonna be live on his channel. So I'm gonna see if while we're live on his YouTube channel, if I can also go live on TikTok and like turn my camera so that you can see what's like on the YouTube screen and do it that way. I don't know if that would be super confusing, but I want to go live on TikTok the night before the exam, but I'm also doing a live with him. So I was trying to see if I can do like 2 in 1. I don't know if that's going to work, but make sure you're following if you're not, because I'm going to be doing YouTube and TikTok lives pretty much every day between now and the exam. I'm also going to be posting YouTube shorts and TikTok videos to help students as well. Yeah, it doesn't matter if you have 2 or 3 body paragraphs. Do what you think is best. A lot of people write only 2 body paragraphs. My favorite is argument because you can write any logical evidence and even if it may not be real. See, that's why it's my least favorite. But yes, you can technically make stuff up and they do not fact check you as long as it's believable. Let's see. Do you recommend reading multiple choice questions before reading the passage? Shout out to Mrs. Brackbill. Awesome. Yes, I do for some students. It's okay. I wish I learned to take tests like that when I was in high school because I was the type of person that would like I would get so bored with the passages. I would be like reading it and then like thinking of something else. Or I would like be rereading the same thing. Or I'd get to the question and I'd be like, wait a minute. Like it would be like, why did so and so not serve somebody coffee? And I'm like, wait, what? Where was that in the text? So, and I still scored well. It just took me longer. I was not a very efficient test taker. Like I ended up doing okay. But once I realized, oh, if I read the questions first, I can be reading with a purpose. I feel like I was less stressed out and it was much more efficient. So if you've never tried reading just the questions first, please do not look at the answer choices because 4 of the 5 are wrong anyway. That can help you read with a purpose for the reading multiple choice. It's especially helpful for some students on like the SAT or the ACT, but it's not helpful for everybody. So about half my students like that strategy, the other half don't. So try it out, see if it's for you. If it's not, then that's okay too. Let's see. Do you have any specific historical events that we should research before the exam? That's a good question. Honestly, I would research historical events that are of interest to you. Because someone asked this, a teacher actually asked this earlier, and I think it's a really good question. Like, what should we be studying? But if everybody's studying the same thing, then you're like kind of limiting yourself. Some of the best essays I've read have been where it was clearly like the student's own like niche knowledge about something. So I do think you should do a little bit of like research, like maybe watch some, I don't know, TED Talks or listen to podcasts or watch a documentary, but it's going to be more interesting and easier for you if you choose topics that you are interested in. So choose a couple historical figures or events that you want to learn about, or people that you want to learn about. I have a weird feeling. We were joking about this like a couple months ago, but teachers were kind of like, well, we don't know the prompt, but like, what do we think kids are going to write about this year? Because, there's a chance that we'll get a lot of COVID examples. And last year, Russia and Ukraine. And because of like some of the documentaries that have come out over the past year, like we expect that if it fits the prompt, we'll see a lot of those. And that's okay. Just make it work. It doesn't matter if other people are writing about the same thing. Just make it work. Be specific and add plenty of commentary. Okay, let's see what we got going on over here on TikTok. Are there any things you need to know or should know to process the right answer? Okay, so kind of good question. Like, just know that they have the sort of like the formula for how they make the test is if there's 5 answer choices, at least 2 of them are kind of like automatic throwaway answers. They could be tempting. Like if you haven't really read the passage, they usually take like a word that is like prominent in the passage and put it in the answer, but it doesn't mean that it's right. So at least 2 of the answers you should be able to eliminate right away. What is hard is like when you get like 2 answers that are kind of similar. So you really want to be looking at like the word choice and ask yourself, does this actually answer the question being asked? And also remember that partially right is not right. So sometimes half the answer choice will be right, but the other half is not answering the question or it's just not accurate. That is a distracting answer. That's not your right answer. I keep practicing MCQ and reviewing what I got wrong, but I'm still not scoring the best. Okay, so here's one thing that you may or may not know. For a multiple choice, if you're trying for a 3 composite, you really only need to be getting approximately 23 out of 45 correct, especially if you make a 4 out of 6 on your essays. So sometimes what happens is people see like, oh, I only made 25 out of 45. That's terrible. Well, that's because we're used to like our grading style, but it's a standardized test. So you're not expected to make 100. And so if you're getting upwards of 50% correct and you're writing decent essays, you're on a good pace for a 3, possibly even a 4, depending on what those numbers are. Let's see. Should we focus more on the MCQs or the essays? It kind of depends. I think it's harder to practice for the MCQ because it really is kind of dependent on the passage. So if it were me and I had room to improve with the writing, I feel like as a student, there's more you could do to prepare between now and the exam for your writing as opposed to your multiple choice, just because they are kind of dependent on the passage. Can you just restate your thesis for your conclusion? Technically, yes. You don't even need a conclusion. It's nice to have one if you can. To make a better conclusion, rather than just restating your thesis or summarizing your points, because your essay is kind of short and we just read that. Like when people say like, and these are the reasons why, it just comes across as like a little cringy. Something better to do for rhetorical analysis, at least, is to ask yourself, why is this passage historically relevant, and talk about that to kind of situate it in a broader context, or to ask yourself, how is this message relevant today, and kind of put it in a broader context that way. For synthesis or argument, depending on what your commentary was, you could maybe include a call to action if you want to. You don't have to, that's just one option. You could talk about like why the issue is important for the future if you didn't already talk about that. So try to do more than just restate your thesis, but it's okay if you do restate your thesis. Is the AP Lang prep book from Princeton Review worth it? Good question. I have not read the most recent one of the Princeton Review. I like some of the Princeton Review's other books, but I haven't looked at their most recent AP Lang one, so I can't say for certain. But I just know that I've had students have some issues with Barron's. Hopefully Barron's doesn't come for me. What's good commentary to you? Good question. We want to make sure we have developed commentary, meaning like you want more commentary than evidence, and it shouldn't just restate your evidence. That's where it gets like limited or simplistic. So some tips for commentary are use the word because. It sounds really simple, but commentary is the why. Like why, how, so what? Why does it matter? So using the word because can help, and also verbs like highlights, illustrates, suggests, emphasizes, those can all help your commentary as well. But I think for rhetorical analysis, good commentary is going to be connecting the rhetorical choice to the rhetorical situation and really examining like why are they making this choice for this audience on this occasion. If it's argument or synthesis, it's more of like, what does my evidence show? Why does it matter? Like in the short term, the long term, like to society, things like that. What are some ways to get the sophistication point in synthesis? A nuanced argument, so not exactly qualifying it, but some qualified arguments are nuanced, meaning like you kind of say, okay, yes, in these situations, but in these situations, it's this. Um, really technically vivid and descriptive writing style. So, really adding in precise language, adverbs, and adjectives that can help. Stylistically adding in like colons and dashes can help your writing as long as they're done correctly. Um, and adding in some more precise words in general, omitting lower level words. That can help your style. Really, with sophistication for synthesis, it's usually because there's some kind of broader context. So, if you happen to have outside knowledge of the topic, which you may or may not, that can be helpful. I wish the exam was online. I can type. Yes, I that's the thing is like a lot of schools had the choice of whether they wanted to do like the digital or the paper. Our school chose paper because even though our students are more comfortable with typing, we were worried about what the multiple choice platform would look like. So if it goes really well for people this year, maybe next year we'll reconsider. I feel like it won't matter for you all, but I feel like within like 5 years or so, they're going to make it all digital anyway. For the rhetorical analysis essay, do they give examples of the terms? They used to, they don't anymore. They're just going to say rhetorical choices, and then it's going to say either message, argument, or purpose. They used to kind of put in like a rhetorical devices such as this and this. They don't do that anymore. It's more open. The reason why is because what was happening is like that was all that students would write about, and then it was kind of limiting students, or like they thought they had to write about that. So they keep it more open now. How um, much time should I spend outlining before writing? I would say so for synthesis, you get a 15-minute reading period anyway. I tell my students to spend about 10 minutes reading and annotating and planning for synthesis, 10 to 12. Try not to use the full 15. The reason why is because most of my students need a little bit more time for rhetorical analysis. So, whatever time they don't use, they put toward rhetorical analysis. And then for rhetorical analysis, 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how thorough you are or need to be. Um, and then for argument, maybe 5 minutes to plan, especially because sometimes having a plan can help you write faster. Should I be memorizing terms that show up frequently on the MCQs? There really aren't a ton that actually show up frequently, so there isn't really a list to memorize. In one of my recent videos about AP Lang MCQ, I made a list in the video of like some terms that students might not be aware of that sometimes come up. But I don't think you need to memorize a lot of terms. They used to put like devices on there, like anadiplosis and caesura and all these things. They don't do that anymore. So you don't need to memorize those. So yeah, you don't need to memorize as many devices as you can. They actually, what they're doing now, instead of putting the device name, like instead of saying metaphor, they're going to just say compares. So that's a lot easier, I think, anyway. How can I increase my reading speed and comprehension? It's kind of hard because, like, for synthesis, you can kind of skim and still get the gist of it. But for the passages, it actually might help you to read the questions first. That way, you know what you're looking for. So it's not necessarily increasing your comprehension, but it's helping you read with a purpose and be more strategic. How much commentary should we include in the essays? So every evidence needs to be followed by commentary. So I would say 3 to 5 sentences of commentary approximately, like per each evidence. Should I annotate on the MC passages? If you want to, my students who read the questions first will kind of mark like where the question is. Like if it says in paragraph 1, they'll put like, let's say question 1 is about paragraph 1, they'll put like a little 1 there so they know where to go. So you can, if it helps you, but you don't have to. You might want to note like shifts and stuff because usually if there's a shift, like if it says yet or but or however, usually there's some kind of question about that. But I don't think you need to like be dissecting everything because chances are you're probably going to annotate stuff that's actually not being asked in the questions. So I don't annotate much for the MCQ. How many pieces of evidence should I use in rhetorical analysis? 2 to 3 per paragraph. Should you skim the passages? You can for like synthesis, possibly. It's harder to do that on the MCQ because some of the questions are going to be about a very specific paragraph or line number, in which case you could just kind of go to that and read the surrounding sentences. but some of the questions where it's about the whole passage, it might be harder to skim. I would say only skim if you are running out of time. I don't read the passage and just go straight to the questions because I'm a slower reader. Is that okay? I do think you can go to the questions first and read them, but I would still read the passage. About 6 out of 10 questions you could probably answer without having read the whole thing and just kind of going to the passage and reading the surrounding sentences. But there's going to be about 40% of them where you need to have read the whole passage. Which essay should I start with? Most people start with synthesis because it's the most time consuming. So I recommend starting with that in most cases, but prioritize the essays that you are strongest with. And if you're equal at all of them, then look at the prompts that day and be like, yep, I like this one best. I'm going to start there. Are there any specific rhetorical vocabulary to know when taking the MCQs, or is it like SAT reading? It's like SAT reading for the most part. I do have a recent video where it's like AP Lang MCQ that has some terms in it that you might not be aware of. So I would definitely check out that video. You can even like fast forward and just like pause the video if you don't want to hear me talk. But it's on there. There's words like exigence, rhetorical situation, underscores. They sometimes put that as a verb, and that means emphasizes. There's some tone words that they use that people might not be aware of, like colloquial is informal, ingratiating is like flattering. So there's just some words that have kind of come up on the stuff on like AP Classroom or like released info that might be helpful to know, but there isn't like a list of terms that you absolutely must memorize. I have a mock synthesis essay tomorrow. Any tips? Okay, so for synthesis, try to put 2 sources in each paragraph if you can, because that helps create a conversation of sources. As you're reading the sources, kind of figure out like, okay, what's this one about? Like, what is the perspective here? Then when you get to the next source, ask yourself, okay, how do these two relate? Are they similar? Are they opposites? That kind of thing. And then as you get to the next one, okay, how does source C relate to A or B? That way you can start to see how the sources relate to each other as you go. It might help to make like some kind of T-chart or table if you want to, but I recommend planning out your thesis and main ideas before you actually start writing. So for synthesis, that would kind of be like, my thesis is that like the main ideas are this and this, and then the evidence I'm going to use for this main idea are these sources. That way you have an idea, and it also helps you make sure that you have 3 sources. Because if you don't have 3 sources, it's usually a lower scoring essay. Basically, it says in the rubric that you need 3. So you want to make sure you're properly citing everything. How do we pick out rhetorical choices that the author uses? Ask yourself, what is the writer doing? And that helps. So it could be things like repetition or comparison, but it could be things that are more broad, like they're acknowledging a situation or they're flattering their audience, that kind of thing. Let's see. I think I answered everything over on YouTube. Let me just double check. I know I answered that one. What are some common rhetorical devices found in essays that I can refer to if I can't think of anything? So first of all, word choice and tone are in everything because everything has words. Now you want to actually think about like what type of words they're using. Like, is it patriotic word choice? Is it, like what type of words are they using? For instance, if there's a lot of like we and us and our, I would call that unifying diction. Sometimes it's rare, but like sometimes they might do a lot of like them and us, and it's more divisive, or like you and me, and like their purpose, if they're trying to create separate things, then it could be divisive. So you could even say like it might not be the best way, but if it's like harsh diction or somber diction, you could add like a descriptor there too. Repetition is pretty common. It's not in everything. Comparison and contrast are pretty common, but again, not in everything. There's the appeals, which that's like a whole separate issue. But remember that choices create appeals. So we don't want to just jump into here's a paragraph about logos, and here's one about ethos, and here's one about pathos. But those things are present. Instead of saying logos, say logic. Instead of saying ethos, say credibility. Instead of pathos, tell us which emotion. Please don't just write the author uses pathos, because that tells us absolutely nothing. You need to tell us which emotion it is, because if you're talking about nostalgia, that's very different than fear, which is very different than patriotism. So make sure you tell us. And usually I have like a whole video about this on YouTube if you want more info. If you just search for Coach Hall writes rhetorical appeals, I have a YouTube video and a blog post that'll pop up. But with the appeals, if you know it's logical, ask yourself why it's logical. So is it the facts, statistics, examples? That's going to be your choice. Providing facts is a choice. For pathos, like emotional appeal, it would be like usually detail or word choice. So in nonfiction, we tend to say detail and not imagery. Do I need a counterclaim? No, you don't have to have one. If you want to include one and you have time and it's going to help your argument, great. If not, don't bother. Is it realistic to finish every essay and get a 6 on each one? Some people do. It's rare, but yeah, some people get a 6 on each one. They had, it was either 9 or 12 kids get like a perfect score last year. So like all 45 multiple choice and 6 out of 6 on all the essays. But yeah, like you might not get a 6 on like all of them, but yeah, it's possible too. How do I boost my MCQ? Figure out what you are like. Are you better at writing or reading? And then focus your attention there first. So that way you're trying to maximize your points. So if you're like, yeah, I'm pretty good at the writing, but I just never have time to finish, start there. That way you can build those points because we want to get at least 23 out of 45 if we can. I'm taking AP Gov tomorrow morning. So nervous. That can be helpful for Lang because you might be able to write about some Gov stuff. I've heard the Gov exam, I don't want to say it's easy because an AP test itself isn't easy, but I've heard that it is like a manageable exam. So don't stress too much, especially if you like are like if you've already studied and everything, just do the best you can. I know the scoring for that is very different than AP Lang, but like stay positive because if you think the test is hard, I promise you everybody else in the room probably does too. And they take the difficulty into consideration in different ways. So you've got this. I wish we had Gov when I was in high school because it sounds like a cool class. There's 45. Oh, you're talking about Gov. There's 55 multiple choice and 4 FRQs. Wow. But they're shorter though, aren't they? Aren't they a little bit shorter on Gov maybe? What can make me lose points on evidence? Not having specific evidence. So especially for like arguments, if you just have a bunch of generalizations, that's not going to help your evidence. Like you have to have specific evidence to be eligible for a 3 or a 4. So that would be one thing that would evidence wise that would not help. It's also not helpful to have these huge long quotes. It's not that it reduces your score, but usually when students have these really long quotes, they just don't put enough commentary. So short quotes. Yeah, the FRQ is quite short. There's just a lot to memorize, I bet. How many paragraphs should we have for each essay? An intro and 2 bodies is the preferred minimum. You could do an intro and 3 body paragraphs. You could do an intro, 2 bodies, and a conclusion. But ideally, at least an intro and 2 bodies. Very worst case scenario, an intro and 1 body paragraph, because you can at least get a 1-2-0 doing that, but that's not ideal. So most people do 2 body paragraphs. And your intro can be short. Conclusions are not necessary. They can be nice, but they're not necessary. How do we add commentary to synthesis essays? One thing, depending on the prompt, is you might be able to add some personal experience in. So like last year's prompt was about STEM. You probably have some familiarity with that. Cursive was the year before that. So I don't know what the topic's going to be this year, but if it's something education-based or something that you have experience with, if you have experience that could somehow tie into the evidence from the sources, that's a way to expand your commentary. Also be thinking about like why you chose that evidence, because usually students choose evidence that's very logical. So like facts, statistics, examples, testimonials, like expert testimony and stuff. So really be thinking about like why you chose that and like what it reveals about like society, like how does this issue impact society, short term, long term, that kind of thing. Can we still score well if we write 2 body paragraphs and include 3 sources? Yeah, yes, you can. Can the evidence in my argument be only personal experience? Technically, yes. Some prompts kind of lend themselves to personal experience more than others, but there's nothing that says you can't. It might be nice to not have it be all one category, if you will, but choose the best evidence to prove your point. How do you differentiate the writing questions from the reading ones? Great question. I'm sorry. I probably should have explained this a little bit more clearly because I've just been talking about it as if everybody knows. And clearly I should have backtracked a little bit. So reading multiple choice they're all going to be in one test. There's 45 questions, but the reading is going to be reading comprehension. And that is going to be passages 1 and 2. It's going to be approximately 23 or 24 questions total. Those passages are longer and they have more questions. The writing MCQ, those are the ones that people tend to do better with, and they're kind of new. They've only been on the exam a couple years, are shorter passages. So there's about 5 to 8 questions per passage, and the passages are much shorter. And at the top of the passage, it's going to say, this is a draft. So that's going to be around question 23 or 24 to the end of the test. Is laying on May 8th or 9th? It's on the 9th. It should be a Tuesday. So I'll be doing a study session on May 8th on the Garden of English YouTube channel with Tim Freitas. Make sure you're following here because I'm going to try to go live on TikTok there, like both as well. So we'll be live on his YouTube and we'll be live on TikTok. And I'll also be doing YouTube lives on TikTok and so like lives on TikTok and YouTube pretty much every day between now and the test. That's my goal. Let's see. How can I actually realize the author's tone in the passages? So remember, word choice creates tone. So there should be words that kind of tell you, even if you're not totally sure, just ask yourself at first, like, what's their attitude toward the subject? Is it positive or negative? And kind of start there. But the word choice is going to create the tone. One time I thought the author was being serious and he was being satirical and I missed everything. Okay, that's really common. But here's hopefully the good news is that I don't think they're going to, I don't want to jinx it. I don't think they're going to put satire on the test. And if they do, I am very hopeful that they will tell students it's satire because it's almost unfair not to. So yeah. Usually with satire, you can kind of tell it's satire because it's like, usually it's very exaggerated. But yeah, unofficially, they said that they weren't going to put satire on the rhetorical analysis again, unofficially, because they did a couple satirical prompts like more than a decade ago. But also with their emphasis on the rhetorical situation now, satire doesn't really fit. Not that it doesn't fit, but it's way too hard to do for what they want to be done. So they've just kind of said, we're probably not going to. Now, could it be on the multiple choice? Yes, but I would really hope that they would at least tell you it's satire. So always read the little thing above the passage because they sometimes give you like a little hint as to what it's about. Everyone has different opinions, but what do you think is the hardest AP exam overall? Well, for me, it would be like calculus or something because I'm terrible at math. In terms of English, I think lit is a little bit harder than Lang. But you don't need to take Lang to take lit, but for most students, they benefit more from the nonfiction of Lang, whereas lit is a bit more abstract. But yeah, and I would say some of the like APUSH and stuff I think is really fun. Like I like history, but it's a lot of memorization. But you all have stuff that we don't have. Like I hope I'm a voice for AP Lang. But like there's also, for history, you've got you've got Heimler and all them. So they have some great videos. Is it bad to not have a conclusion? No, it's not bad. It's okay. My teacher thinks Lang is harder than lit. I mean, for some people it can be, but I don't find Lang hard. I think Lang is actually helpful to take first if you can before lit. And we and I say that because like we used to do lit then Lang at our school, and then when I started teaching it, they let us flip it. So I had kids that took lit then Lang, and so they were in Lang, and then I had kids that it was Lang and they took lit the next year, and like they've historically said lit is harder. Not that it's like super hard, but they're like yeah, it's more abstract, but some of them like that though. How long should we read for rhetorical analysis? Read and annotate the passage, and don't take like forever with it, but be thorough because you don't want to miss anything. Hold on. I think there was like a first part of this one. If I only use 1 to 2 rhetorical devices, what will I score? So you need at least 2 rhetorical choices in your essay anyway, because you want to have at least 2 body paragraphs. So it's really about your commentary. That'll kind of be more of a predictor of your score. What tips do you have for managing your time on rhetorical analysis? So I did a mock essay with my students last year, and I I had 45 minutes and I told myself I was only going to spend 5 minutes reading and planning. It took me 10 and I was really worried I was going to run out of time. I ended up literally writing faster, but I had annotated thoroughly and I had planned my essay to the point where even though I had less time than I had wanted, I was able to get my good ideas out. So, really make sure that you have at least a thesis. If you're looking to cut time, don't worry about a super fluffy intro. It's not going to help your score in most cases. Just write a couple sentences that introduce the rhetorical situation in a thesis, or just a thesis if you are running out of time. If you struggle with pacing for rhetorical analysis, forget the conclusion. Just focus on 2 solid body paragraphs. I took a practice test and had 2. I don't know. Is there more to that comment? I don't want to miss the. Do your essays need to have sophisticated language? It helps, but it's not required. So one way to make it more sophisticated is to include adverbs and adjectives to make your writing more precise. So like for instance, instead of saying the author states, just say like he logically states or logically asserts or passionately asserts or patriotically, so adding in those adverbs and adjectives can help. And then trying to avoid lower level words like good, bad, thing, stuff, huge. That can really help as well. How can I make my rhetorical analysis stronger? Analyzing words or details within the quotes that you've chosen, and then also really thoroughly connecting the rhetorical choice to the rhetorical situation. So asking yourself, why this choice for this audience on this occasion? I have a video on my YouTube channel that's called something to the effect of like my best tip for rhetorical analysis. And I give a lot of tips in that about how to connect to the rhetorical situation. I also have a pretty recent video about rhetorical analysis sentence frames. So if you search for those videos, usually if you just type in like Coach Hall writes rhetorical analysis sentence frames, the videos should pop up. And I think that could really help. Rhetorical situation means, so the acronym we use is SPACE or SOAP. It depends on which one. They mean the same thing. So SPACE is speaker, purpose, audience, context, exigence. And SOAP is speaker, occasion, audience, and purpose. Occasion is like context plus exigence. So the rhetorical situation is like all the factors that you consider. So it's like the situation from which the text arises. So it's like kind of like puzzle pieces. It's like the speaker and audience relationship, and then the historical context. Exigence is the like the catalyst or the impetus. It's like why they're speaking. Like, were they invited to speak at this? Did something bad happen and they're responding to it? That kind of thing. And then, of course, purpose is important. You want to include that. That's another tip for you for rhetorical analysis, is make sure if your prompt says to connect to purpose, that you do so in each body paragraph, ideally a couple times. Like your commentary should be connecting to purpose or message or argument, whichever one you're asked about. Do I need to know Kairos? No, no, you don't. I feel like with multiple choice, I guess, and run out of time, any tips to improve accuracy? So if you are more accurate with one type of question, prioritize those. That way, if you're guessing, you're at least guessing on the stuff that you're not as good at. How long would you recommend to spend planning each essay, not including the 15 minutes for synthesis? So I actually have my students try not to use the full 15 minutes for synthesis because a lot of them need extra time for rhetorical analysis. So I tell them like 10 to 12 for synthesis, and then those extra few minutes put toward rhetorical analysis. Usually for rhetorical analysis, you need 5 to 10. Argument, you might need about 5. And that's kind of ballpark. Like it might be different for everybody. Oh, well, thank you. Is pathos a rhetorical choice? It's a rhetorical appeal. You can technically write about it. It's better to write about the choice that's creating the appeal. So for pathos, I would say like what is making the appeal? So first of all, what emotion is it? And then like is it the word choice that's making that appeal that you could analyze? Is it the detail that's making the appeal that you could analyze? Focus on that. Do you have a list of rhetorical devices we need to know? I have a YouTube video from back in 2020 that I made like literally the morning of the test. I've been intending to redo it, but it's called like which rhetorical choices do you need to know for the exam? and it has about like 10 in there that are the most common. And I've got some like it's hard for me to like distribute them on social media, but I've got some lists of like just some common ones. Again, it's from that video and like other ones. So I would start there. I have some of my first videos were about rhetorical strategy. So those are really old, for about 4 years old. But yeah, I'm optimistically going to redo that video before the test, but I'm not so sure. But some common rhetorical choices that you might see are like repetition, comparison, contrast, word choice is pretty much in everything. Anecdotes, so like a short story, examples, facts, statistics. And also just remember that it could be like things like flattery or criticism. Like, what are they doing? Ask if you're unsure of what the choice is, ask yourself, what are they doing? And try to use a strong verb. I keep taking practice tests and scoring the same. What should I do? It depends on, are you talking about multiple choice or the FRQs? Because if it's multiple choice, try to identify which type of question you're struggling with and put your attention there. If it's the FRQs, I would recommend looking at samples online and comparing your writing to theirs. Also, if you're looking for tutoring options, if you're on TikTok, check out the information in my profile. If you're on YouTube, it should be in the description of the video. I do offer 20-minute sessions, 40-minute sessions, and group sessions, and I've got some openings this week. So if you want additional help, it's on OutSchool. And when you sign up on OutSchool, you get a credit towards your first class. And a lot of my classes, the credit covers the cost of the class anyway. So if you're interested in tutoring, please reach out to me. I'd be happy to help. Thank you for following. I'll be going live as the exam approaches. And so that way you can know when I'm live. What's the final score we receive called? Oh, it's called a composite score. So you're going to get like a number 1 to 5. Unfortunately, they don't tell you like how you actually did. They just give you a number 1 to 5. How do we transition from one body paragraph to another? That's a great way to help your line of reasoning. Try to, if you can, like from the like second body paragraph, try to refer back to the first body paragraph's main idea and then include the new main idea. If you look on YouTube for my rhetorical analysis sentence frames video and my synthesis and argument sentence frames video, they're both pretty recent, like within the last month. I have some topic sentence frames there. I also have a topic sentence video. Since this question was on YouTube, I might be able to pull it up here. If you just search for like Coach Hall writes topic sentences, I think it comes up. Yes. And let me put the link in YouTube for y'all. Oh, Disney Plus commercial. Okay, so this link on YouTube is the topic sentences one. Yeah, Albert.io has a score calculator. There is a formula. Basically, what you do is you take 1 point for each MCQ. So if you get 25 right, it's 25 points. And then you can take your essays and add all of them up. So if you get all 4s, like it's 12 points. Take that number, multiply it by 3.0566, and then that's your new number. So add that to your multiple choice. And then you get a number, and then your composite is going to be, these are approximate, so it might be 1 or 2 points off. But if your number is between 0 and 35, you get a 1. Sorry if it's backwards. If you are between a 36 and a 51, it's a 2. A 52 to 62 is approximately a 3 composite, and then 63 to 72 is approximately a 4, and 73 to 100 is approximately a 5. But there are online score calculators that are pretty accurate that you can use as well. And then you can kind of plug it in like, oh, if I get 2 more right for multiple choice and I get 1 point higher on an essay, what's that going to do? So that can be really helpful. For synthesis, can I just pick 3 similar sources and only read those instead of reading everything? Well, it's kind of hard because you won't know that they're similar until you've read them, and they don't put them in any particular order. So it's not like, the first 3 are for it and the last 3 are against it. So you should look at all the sources. If you know you're not going to use it, stop reading it. If you don't understand it, stop reading it and come back to it possibly. But it would almost be making more work for yourself if you just look for similar sources, because you're still going to have to read them. And you also might not have an opinion on the topic. So sometimes it's nice to look at the different perspectives and decide, okay, this is the side that I want to take. So just something to think about for that. I'm trying to find a video. Whoops. with your phrases for FRQs, like using thus and henceforth. I had a TikTok video recently where it was like some words that you can include in your essays. That one had pretty good views for whatever reason. I don't know if I have a YouTube video on that. I think it's just a TikTok video. But some of the words like for transitions would be like therefore and thus, moreover. It means the same as furthermore. Sometimes they put moreover on the MCQ. So that's a good one to know. The word underscores means emphasizes. Some people don't know that, and then they kind of get that one wrong. Consequently is a good one. You can use that for any of the FRQs. I'm a slow reader, so can I just look for connections in the sources first? I would just like read, if you're a slow reader, I would read the first paragraph of the source and read all the topic sentences, especially if there's a lot of short paragraphs. And then decide, okay, what's this about? Am I going to use it? Yes or no? And move on. You could also skim and kind of like speed read and just pick out like the keywords, and that might help. But yeah, sometimes you need to slow down to see those connections. Sorry, my phone is like about to die. So let me see if I can. I don't really have a way to charge it without holding it. So it might get a little shaky, but we'll go with that. Okay, let's see. I think I'm all caught up on YouTube questions. Let's see if I missed any on TikTok. Does running metaphors help you get the sophistication point? If you make a strong rhetorical choice, it could help with the sophistication point, but it has to be consistent. Sophistication has to be consistent throughout. Oh, there's a button that says add a live goal. 2 roses. All right, well, sounds good to me. If I get 34 questions right on the MCQ and 4s, what would my overall score be? It'd probably be a 4. Could be a low 5, but I would say if I had to guess off the top of my head, I would say it's a 4. How do you introduce a concession and refutation? So the concession is going to be where you say like, yes, and then you like, or certainly, or whatever, and you acknowledge the merit of the other side. And then your refutation will be like, however, and things like that. So you can put it wherever you want to in your argument. It's not mandatory to include one. But yeah, it's kind of like the language of it is kind of how you introduce it. Sorry, we've got like 2 weird angles going on because I got TikTok here and YouTube here. So if I'm not looking at you, I apologize. Just trying to get caught up on the questions. I'll probably stay on for just a few more minutes to answer any remaining questions. Does MCQ have 5 choices or 4? For AP, it's 5, or at least for AP Lang, it's 5. Would you recommend a whole concession paragraph or integrate it into your other paragraphs? That's a good question. It depends on what you have the time for and what you think is going to help your argument best. Because I think some prompts lend itself to it being separate. And the benefit of it being separate is then you, if you need to scrap it and omit it, you can, and you still have your other good paragraphs. But if you're like, it's kind of quick, I can't be its whole own paragraph, but I do want to put it in here, then yeah, you can work it into a body paragraph. A concession is like a type of, it's like a way to address the counter argument. So there's counterclaim and rebuttal, and then there's concession and refutation. So a concession is when you acknowledge the merit of the other side. So you're being kind of diplomatic. You're like, yes, it's true that this, like other people say this, and that's true. Because, however, and that's the refutation. I do have a video. It's kind of old, but I do have a video on my channel about concession and refutation, and I give some like examples because you can make it like its own separate paragraph if you want to, or you can work it into a paragraph. But yeah, pin your goal so viewers may notice it. Okay. I'm still getting used to going live. I don't know. We got a goal of 2 roses. How to make an essay more sophisticated for the sophistication point. I think that it depends on your like what your strengths are. So some people do better with broader context. Some people do better with like focusing on their style. Some people do better by analyzing like the tension and rhetorical analysis. So it really just depends on like what you think you're good at and leaning into that. Any good tips if you don't know any specific examples for the argument? Great question. So it depends on the prompt, but like you might have personal experience. Think about stuff you talked about in history class or current events. or just like stuff that you're knowledgeable about, and kind of work from there. Something is better than nothing. How do you effectively end body paragraphs? You want to have a concluding sentence. So, kind of like tie back to your thesis, or like it's kind of like a topic sentence. We don't want to introduce new ideas. We want to recap our ideas. So, one way to start them is by saying therefore, and then just kind of reiterating your claim to remind people, hey, this is what I just proved. Thank you for that question. That was a good one over there on YouTube. If I find it difficult to word my thesis, I find it difficult to word my thesis for rhetorical analysis. Any tips? Yes, I have a sentence frame that has helped my students. I have some videos on this if you want to like see it written out. If you just type in like Coach Hall writes rhetorical analysis thesis, there's a few videos that should pop up. But basically, you just say like in speaker's speech, letter, whatever it is, he or she does like choice one and choice two in order to purpose. And there's your thesis. It's defensible. You're good. Awesome. Someone signed up for tutoring. So yeah, if you just joined and you're interested, I do have information on my YouTube description and also on TikTok in my bio. If you are interested in any upcoming sessions, I have a few openings this week, 20-minute sessions, a couple group classes to help you prepare for the test if you want. How doable is self-studying for an AP English course? It is doable. There's actually several students who do it. Um, my channel, I think, can be really helpful. Tutoring can be really helpful, even though you're self-studying. But like, there's a lot of information available online. So as long as you know what is on the test and you use the available resources, especially if you like English, it is very doable. Besides writing essays this week, is there anything else we should do to prepare? I would say if you're struggling with argument, read up on some current events. Maybe that'll help. You can't promise it will, but go to like the flipside.io or go to the donut.co. Those are ones where it kind of gives you multiple perspectives on the same issue. Or watch a documentary. Choose something that is nonfiction that you want to watch. Listen to a podcast if that's your thing. Just kind of brush up on knowledge for Q3 just in case it helps. Does personal anecdotes take away from the sophistication? Technically, no. There have been essays that have gotten the sophistication point that had personal experience. Is synthesis like a DBQ or is it different? It's similar. They're kind of like cousins. Like they're not the same, but they are similar. Basically, the one major difference is for a DBQ, I'm pretty sure you have to use all the sources, but for a synthesis essay, it's just 3. And the writing style is a little bit different and the rubric's a little bit different. So like they're similar, but they're not the same. Is it possible to get a 5 composite if I get a 1.30 on each essay? Yes, but you'd have to have really good multiple choice. Are there any mandatory books that need to be read before taking the AP exam? Nope. Nope. There's no mandatory course reading. In fact, some classes, they don't even have you read a full-length novel for the test, or a full-length work of nonfiction for the test. Let's see. All right, let me answer a couple more. Please make sure you're following, because if there's a question that I haven't answered, feel free to, if you're on TikTok, to go to one of my recent videos and post your comment there, and I'll do a video reply or answer you in another way if I need to. Make sure you're following though, because I'm going to be going live on YouTube and TikTok, trying to go live almost every day before the exam. My goal is every day. And I also have tons of YouTube content and old TikTok videos that could be helpful as well. If you find this helpful, please share it with your friends. It really helps my channel grow, and it's rewarding to see that effort paying off. So please share as well. And if you're on TikTok, we're at 2.6K likes. So do me a favor, just if you're finding this helpful, you got your question answered, tap your screen a couple times. Apparently it's encouraging me to ask for roses. So if you have a rose on TikTok and you want to do that, that's awesome. Feels weird asking for stuff like that. Let's see. On YouTube, it says, for the essay, can I write an intro and 2 long body paragraphs and conclusion? Yes. Yep. Actually, a lot of people do that. That's perfectly fine. Let's see. What is the hardest essay type for students typically? So usually synthesis has the highest average, and I have a theory that it's 1, because the sources are provided, and 2, because students tend to do it first. Rhetorical analysis usually has the lowest average, but it's usually not, it's not low. Like a couple of the prompts have been low, but Usually it's like synthesis is the highest, then argument, then rhetorical analysis. But my students tend to have synthesis is usually their highest, then rhetorical analysis and argument is usually their lowest average. So it just kind of depends. Um, but I think, yeah, for whatever reason, like people find RA the hardest. Last year's argument prompt was like apparently really hard. So I think last year it was like a little bit different. Yeah, most students can do well in the argument essay. Last year, the prompt was just a little hard, but synthesis is usually the highest, and then comes argument, and then rhetorical analysis. But these averages are usually kind of close together, so it's not like a huge difference. It's not like one's like way up there and one's lower. They're all really close together for the most part. There's been a few prompts in recent years where like one question was noticeably lower. Like the year that they had the Abigail Adams letter, I think it was like 2012, that one was low. That one really threw people for a loop. All right. I think I got all the questions on. Oh, one more on YouTube. How do I introduce evidence in writing a synthesis essay? I have a YouTube video on this. If you type, there's actually two because I like made one and then I forgot I made it and then I made a new one. So if you type in Coach Hall writes how to cite evidence for a synthesis essay, it'll come up and I have some examples in there that can really help. We want to avoid saying according to source A. We want to like actually lead into it with the original source's credentials, like according to a 2017 study from the Pew Research Center, and quoting that or something, and then putting your parenthetical citation. So if you want help with that, please check that out. Let me see if I can find the video link on YouTube real quick, because that was a YouTube question. But yeah, if you ever need a video of mine and you're not sure, just type in like Coach Hall writes and then kind of like the keywords of it, and hopefully it'll pop up, because I've got like 4 years worth of content. My newer videos tend to be stronger, but some of the older videos have good content as well. And the exam changed a couple years ago. So some of the old videos are about like the old style. Okay, I'm going to put 2 links in the YouTube chat. This is the short video. It's like 4 minutes long. And I redid it apparently, and I made it more detailed. And this second one is going to be like 18 minutes long, which is kind of long, sorry. But it's more detailed. So there's the other one. So those are some, if you're on YouTube, those are synthesis ones. Let's see what we got on. How do you, oh, it looks like it got cut off. Yeah, my teacher said the Abigail question was hard. Yeah. I like it though. Like I like the prompt. It's just a harder prompt. I struggle with analyzing and explaining evidence a lot. Any tips? So the key is to use words like because or verbs like highlights, suggests, shows is kind of like all we don't want to use shows if we can avoid it. Showcases maybe. Really think about why it matters. Like ask why, how, or so what. For rhetorical analysis, connect that commentary to the rhetorical situation. Like why are they making this choice for this audience on this occasion? For synthesis and argument, ask yourself, why does this issue really matter? Like, what are the short-term or long-term implications? Also ask yourself, why did I choose that quote? Like, what does it reveal or show? And then kind of go from there. Because presumably you chose the quote for a reason. So expand upon that. Like, what is it teaching us? I just signed up for tutoring. How will I join the session? Awesome. Yes, I'm so glad to be able to work with you. So what you're going to do is OutSchool will send you an email, and you'll, with the account that you created to sign up, you'll be able to go into the OutSchool classroom, and there's going to be like a button for the live, where you'll it's like a Zoom session, but if it's a one-on-one, it's just us on a Zoom. And OutSchool will send you reminders. You'll get a reminder like the day before. You'll get a reminder like 20 minutes before. If you have any trouble, they have like a tech support on the site, or I can help you as well. But yeah, I'm looking forward to tutoring. So if you're interested in tutoring, the info is in the YouTube description or in the link in my profile. I've got a few more openings, and I'm happy to open up more if people are interested. So we can talk about an essay, we can go over strategy, whatever you want to talk about in these sessions. Are any of the past MCQs released? No, unfortunately not. There's a few from like a decade ago, but they've changed it since then. They don't release the MCQ supposedly because they might use the passages again. They're just super protective over it. So the only way you can look at like a full practice test for that from the College Board is on AP Classroom. They have a few practice tests on there. Yeah, they don't release the MCQ. I wish they did. But I think it's because of, like, all the work that goes into, like because apparently they, like, give the MCQs to, like, freshmen in college or something, and they norm it before they put it out there, and there's all this work that's involved. It's not as easy as just writing an essay question, and so they're very protective of those, like, super protective of the MCQ. How do you make the sources talk to each other when writing a synthesis essay? So really look for like overlap, like similarities, and try to put two sources in the paragraph. So kind of like say, okay, so this source says this, and here's my commentary. And then additionally or similarly, and we've got this one that's related, that kind of thing. I have a video on my channel from a couple years ago where I was kind of like outlining a synthesis essay or like reviewing a student's like a sample essay kind of thing. And so you might be able to see some tips in some of those older synthesis videos that I have. The AP Classroom MCQs are pretty easy. What do you think? I tend to agree. So if you're talking about the full length test 1 and test 3, my students tend to score higher on. Test 2, their scores dip a little bit, but they're still decent. But their scores tend to correlate with what their composite is when they get their composite. So I do think they're pretty accurate. And the progress checks, you get like a color, so like dark green. My students for the past 2 years that have consistently gotten dark green on progress checks have tended to get 5 composites. Those that are like dark green, light green, kind of a mix, or tend to be the 4. Those that get all light green consistently tend to be the 3s. And then those that get a mixture of like light green and dark yellow tend to be a 2, that kind of thing. So if you take the progress checks seriously, they are a good indicator of how you're doing in the class, but they're not realistic in terms of like the format because it's like 2 questions per passage or like 2 to 4. Like it's not how the test actually is. All right, awesome. So it's 10 o'clock here, which is not super late, but I'm getting kind of tired. So I think I'm gonna log off, but I will try to come back on tomorrow night after my son's T-ball game. I'm gonna have to be dugout mom tomorrow, so I might be tired tomorrow, but I will try to hop on for at least like 30 minutes to an hour tomorrow night to answer more questions. If you have them, feel free to post questions on recent videos so I can respond there as well. Because if you have the question, I'm sure other people do. So on TikTok or YouTube, you can ask questions. I'll do my best to get to those as well. Thank you so much. Please make sure that you are following as well. That way you get notified when I go live again. All right. Have a great week, everybody. Thank you so much. All right. We're ending on YouTube. Bye, everybody on